So, what if the American Revolution wasn't quite the heroic fight for freedom we all learned about in school? Today, we're jumping into Howard Zinn's super provocative chapter, Tyranny is Tyranny. It really challenges that classic story and makes you ask, for a whole lot of people back then, was the revolution just trading one set of rulers for another?
You know these words, right? They're practically the bedrock of the entire American story. It's this beautiful, revolutionary promise of equality. And the narrative we usually get is pretty straightforward. A united people rising up against the tyrannical king to create a government for everybody.
But here's where Zinn throws a wrench in the works. He challenges us to ask a really critical question. When the Founding Fathers wrote, all men, who were they actually talking about? And that one question, well, it's the key that unlocks a completely different way of seeing 1776.
Okay, so let's take a look at that promise of 1776. It was packaged as this unified fight for liberty, but according to Zinn, it really wasn't that simple at all.
And this is where Howard Zinn's book, A People's History, comes in and just flips the script. See, Zinn's whole approach is to tell history from the bottom up. He focuses on the people who are usually in the footnotes, the enslaved, the poor, indigenous peoples. And his analysis of the revolution is a perfect example of this completely different perspective.
So what was really going on behind the scenes? Zinn argues the leaders of the revolution made what he calls a useful discovery, and it was one that had a lot more to do with power and control than with grand ideals.
Here's the absolute heart of the argument. Zinn says the colonial elite were kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. They had pressure from Great Britain, for sure, but they were also terrified of rebellions from poor people right there at home. So the revolution, it became the perfect tool to take all that anger and aim it outwards at a common enemy.
As Zinn puts it, the revolution was a masterstroke for the American elite. I mean, think about it. It let them kick out their British rivals, secure their own wealth and land. And, this is the crucial part, create a new national identity that could unite just enough of the population behind them to stay in control.
Which leads us right to our next section, consensus and control. Because if the goal was to get everybody on board with a new ruling class, how did they pull it off? How do you convince a poor farmer to fight and die in a war that might just swap one rich guy for another?
And this right here really shows the tension Zinn is talking about. On one side, you have the inspiring public promise from the Declaration, but on the other side, he argues, was its hidden function, to create a system that could keep dissent under control and lock in the power of a new American elite.
So how did they build this consensus? Zinn points to a few really clever strategies. First, they used that powerful, unifying language of liberty and freedom. Second, serving in the army together created a new sense of being American. But the most critical move was giving out just enough tangible benefits, like land, to a slice of the white population. This created what Zinn calls a buffer class. These small property owners now had a stake in the new system. They would act as a buffer, standing between the wealthy elite at the top and the most oppressed groups at the bottom, enslaved people, Native Americans, and the very poor, making it much harder for them to unite.
And to really drive this point home, Zinn quotes another historian, Carl Dagler. He basically says, look, this wasn't some huge social upheaval. The same colonial ruling class that held power before the war, guys like George Washington, who was one of the wealthiest people around, were the exact same ones in charge after the war.
And all of this leads to the powerful conclusion of Zinn's chapter, summed up by its title, Tyranny is Tyranny. Because for the vast majority of people living in America, you have to ask, what did this revolution actually change?
Think about it. For enslaved people, for Native Americans being pushed off their land, for poor farmers still stuck in debt, the change was hardly revolutionary. Yeah, the government was new and the flag was different, but the system of exploitation, it often stayed exactly the same. From their perspective, tyranny is tyranny, whether its face is British or American.
Ultimately, Zinn's analysis isn't just about 1776. It's a challenge for us, today. It forces us to ask some really tough questions about our own national stories. You know, when we hear talk of unity and the national interest, who really benefits? And when we say we the people, whose voices are we truly including and whose are still being left out?